And welcome to Fireside Chats #1 with Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, flameinmind.com. The title of this Fireside Chat is Solution to Transhumanism, Plasma Physics of Implosion in DNA, the Real Physics of Ensoulment, and the only definition of the way out of transhumanism. And part of this conversation is going to include a book review of what I think is wonderful, Michael Sala's new Galactic Federation's Council's new book, which I think is excellent and useful, working with Elena Denan. And also I'm going to be discussing Michael Sala's newest conversations with William Henry about issues with transhumanism. And also we're going to be talking about some of the latest work with Elena Denan and her conversations with Dan Willis. So this should be fun. The primary theme of this conversation is, if we actually knew clearly what the physics of ensoulment was, the kind of implosion that bliss generates in DNA, compressing and solidifying the core of the aura so that the aura emits the longitudinal array coherence called rainbow light body or Ba from the Ka or Kesjan body, as William Henry repeatedly refers to this rainbow light body as the difference between the new human and the old human. Well, if we understood the coherence of that body well and what makes that aura of humans coherent enough to be and have a soul in order to lucid dream, then we have the absolute clear positive physics proof to decide what is transhumanism and loss of soul versus what enables the ensoulment of humans into destiny. Until we're clear on that, we're stuck with transhumanism and putting gadgets inside of us. As William Henry well says, we're stuck to all condemned to essentially becoming the Borg. The problem is, until we get absolutely clear on the electrical physics of what enables humans to have a soul, we will not be able to resist the pressure toward transhumanist return of the Borg. That's the problem. And a primary example of that solution that I would like to use as a shining example today would be the film we just made that went viral with Jean-Charles Moyen and Patrick Botti, the second last film on our YouTube channel, 2 million views, 300 videos, youtube.com/DanWinterFractalField. The film with Jean-Charles Moyen, the French secret space program survivor, who's famous filmmaker and famous for the fact that his lucid dreaming regularly turns into the dreams became real and it became a Stargate, and he came back with sand between his toes and water from where he lucid dreamed to, proven with many witnesses. Well, how do dreams become real? Have you ever talked with an electrical engineer about that? Well, I'm here to be that electrical engineer and have that conversation with you. How do dreams become real? And here's the physics, and it's brief. So Jean-Charles came to us and said, well, they abducted me, the ETs, who, by the way, don't generally have a soul. They abducted him when he was young because he had this talent that his lucid dreams became real. Like he could make a Stargate electrically inside his own body repeatedly when the yearning developed. So Jean-Charles came to us and says, we need to measure this because people don't believe it, and that's going to be the climax of my third movie. This is what Jean-Charles said. So he did his homework at my suggestion, got the flameinmind.com brainwave measure, correlated with a new feature from Patrick Botti, programmer for Flame in Mind, which shows the phase lack of heart, brain, breath, all on one gorgeous screen. It's amazing. New features, flameinmind.com, brainwave measurement, the best way to measure bliss, and the best way to use infrasound to trigger bliss binaurals. Anywho, Jean-Charles does his homework. He sent the recording of his bliss moment to Patrick, who was speechless for days. He says, oh my God, this is the kind of coherent cascade we're getting from the kids who can see without their eyes, except extremely increased coherence, density coherence in the alpha-beta cascades in the aura. In other words, his brainwaves had that alpha-beta golden ratio and octave cascades that looked like a caduceus in the aura, indicating when children see without their eyes, which is simply, they see this little plasma tube vortex open inside, and that becomes their eyeball, and they don't need their eyes, proving The only real physics of consciousness is absolutely the density of that plasma vortex that forms inside your head, a plasma tornado, net of fireflies among the synapses. But by the way, it's the first answer ever to how you take your consciousness outside your head, that plasma vortex. So all the physics of consciousness people on this planet should be jealous because they haven't explained yet how all these medical doctors and surgeons are talking about the science of their out-of-body experiences. Well, when before has the physics of consciousness explained to you exactly what it is you take outside your body when you lucid dream and when you die? Well, this electrical engineer is here to tell you we know exactly what it is you take with you. A plasma vortex, a tornado donut, the center of which conjugates and becomes, just as every young person who sees without their eyes tells you, that plasma vortex tube becomes an eyeball. Ain't that cool? That's called the physics of consciousness. There ain't nothing else. Anywho, that's also the clue to the physics of soul, because the same harmonic cascade we measure in kids we teach to see without their eyes, flameandmind.com/outer vision, the program to teach kids to see without their eyes with brainwave biofeedback and bliss trance induction, basically centripetal force. The same harmonic series is exactly what we saw in John Charles' brainwave frequency signature. At the moment his lucid dream was turning into a portal, he was actually starting to travel outside his body at the moment that beautiful harmonic series occurred, except his brainwave harmonics were much more coherent and dense. Same characteristic frequency signature, a golden ratio and an octave cascade tuned to the alpha, which is tuned to Planck, caduceus implosive, the logo of Hermes, who is the hero of the returning 9 cedar races, who is here to teach us what? The caduceus? Hint, hint, hint. The reason the cedar races Hermes Thoth, came back was to teach the physics of ensoulment, which is the fact that induces the plasma compression in the aura that allows the aura to become centripetal enough that there emerges at the Planck threshold a squirt gun of longitudinal interferometry called the Ba from the Ka, the Kesjan body, the rainbow light body, the garment of lucidity, everything that William Henry's talking about in his conversation. Wonderful conversation with Michael Salla in their latest film. I mean, I think William Henry is really great, and I like all the mystical research he does. And I'm delighted to talk about Michael Salla here because this latest book, I think, is fabulous on the history of galactic federations. But I would like to tease William Henry a little bit, and that is where he says, well, in order to avoid transhumanism, we need to know what God made us for. He keeps saying, well, is this what God intended? Now, we electrical engineers don't usually ask the question, what did God intend? No. The way we would ask the question would be, what's your electrical definition of God? In other words, God is our name for how plasma became intelligent. That's what our name for God means. First local, and then interstellar, and then intergalactic plasma intelligence. That's what we mean when we say God. Ancestral memory, all these names for this big longitudinal array, fractal field, ancestor memory, Kesjan body, collective unconscious, Akashic records. We have too many names, but not enough electrical engineers involved in the conversation. Anywho, I got news for William Henry. We don't have to ask the question, we will know when we're sucked into transhumanism when we figure out what God intended. No. That's not an answer. That's a question. The answer is to know what God is. God is the potential for plasma to become intelligent, self-organizing, self-aware, starting with around your aura, then around planets, then around stars, and then around galaxies. Plasma gets very intelligent, okay? And how that plasma got intelligence is called implosion, recursive turn inside out. We made several films on that. So when William Henry says we need to know what God intended in order to, what he really means is we need to understand how the plasma around your aura gets intelligent enough to be sustainable, propagate, which starts with, we know, the known physics of what electric fields, hint, bliss, compression, cause lucid dreaming, the best way to predict who will take memory through death. Certainly a good electrical definition of ensoulment. Who's going to take memory through death electrically? If ever there was a definition of ensoulment, I'd say that's it. In other words, you propagate coherently in that longitudinal array called heaven, plains of Sharon, Champs-Élysées, all these names we have. But actually, this is a name for a fractal electric field where the longitudinal nodes compress well. For example, dodecaecosa Earth grid, where dreams are more possible, where telepathy is more possible, where radioactivity is reduced, where labyrinths are possible, etc. So, my suggestion here is very simple, that once we have a clear electrical definition of what allows humans to get and have an electrical soul, then and only then will we be able to make decisions about, are we becoming a Borg and a transhuman with all these gadgets implanted, or are we actually becoming sustainable and ensouled in the classic sense of, quote, what did God intend? Which means, what did plasma intelligence intend? Which means, what did implosion intend? Because at the center of implosion, you have the principle of negentropy, self-organization, which is essentially the principle of quote-unquote divine, meaning fractal intelligence. So when we get more electrical about this, we can have a better understanding of not just the path, the only path out of transhumanism, the return of the Borg, the return of a soul, but as we always said, the definition of culture is, do you know how to teach your kids how to have a bliss experience, which is how to implode, compress their aura, and make what is now called a soul. And that's why that defines whether a culture has culture, actually. It's not color of wine and shoe polish. No. Can you teach your young people how to have a bliss experience? That's called culture. Hello, any indigenous tribe can tell you that. So let's continue to fund our cultural organizations in our countries, but let's define culture correctly so we know what to fund. Bliss experience for young people, the real science. The title of my second book, Conscious Kids, Implosion, Secret Science of Immortality. Free PDF, goldenmean.info/conscious kids. Anywho, so this conversation is supposed to be about, can we understand a real path out of Return of the Borg transhumanism into ensouled children? And I keep returning to the idea that we will need hard science in order to have that conversation. Otherwise, governments and universities are not with us in that conversation. So we can't quite say, is it what God intended? No. That's not, it's a beautiful thing. And we can respect that collective intelligence of that collective plasma intelligence. But we need to know what made that plasma collectivity intelligence so we can talk to electrical engineers and therefore governments about what it is to have a soul. Anywho, this is the Storl to my Mori, and as you can see, this is my passion, and therefore how we have fun. So I have notes. For this conversation. So in William Henry's film with Michael Salla, which I much enjoyed, I like, for example, the section where he talks about the fact that the Anunnaki were named the Shining Ones, and he repeatedly talks about the radiance, Joseph's technicolor coat. What did that mean in the seeds of Benjamin? We know the 7-color rainbow coat was a name for recursion in the plasma field of the aura named getting a soul. That's why Benjamin had the seeds and Joseph's technicolor coat. It's a name for not just the genetics of the Grail bloodline, implosion in the DNA, the physics of soul, but it's the name for the onset of the possibility of the coherence in the aura, called the Shining One or the Rainbow Coat, all those names. So I would take William Henry's beautiful conversation one step further and use electrical engineering and say, now we know what that rainbow coat is, the shining, and that is the propagation of a coherent longitudinal projective, plasma projective interferometry. That means simply that the aura has gotten dense enough at center to convert the transverse EMF, the up and down EMF, which doesn't go very far, to implode, precisely conjugate at the Planck threshold, and propagate the squirt gun, where the pine cones kiss noses, out into a coherent longitudinal EMF, sometimes called incorrectly called scalar or torsional. And that longitudinal EMF propagation bounces at the sacred sites, the dodecacosa nodes, and those compression nodes form an array, and we inhabit that larger array. And so the rainbow light body, the Kesjan body, all these, Joseph's Technicolor coat, that, as William Henry said, is that the new human? Is that human being 2.0? It is a very specific, electrically measurable form of coherence. Remember, Therify.net repeatedly triggers lucid dreaming. And this is implosive phase conjugate plasma. We know exactly what electric field triggers a lucid dream, as we knew what brainwave harmonics triggered the compression where Jean-Charles Moyen's coherent dreaming became a stargate. It's the onset of implosive compression. So imagine that. If we knew the physics of what makes a soul, suddenly it's not a mystery anymore. It's physics. It doesn't mean it's not beautiful, it's not romantic, it's not beautifully spiritual, but it's beautifully romantic because it's beautiful physics. So physics doesn't collapse the romance of spirituality, it makes it more beautiful. So I would encourage people like William Henry, are talking about the onset of the coherence in the aura that he calls the rainbow light body, to learn about how longitudinal fields propagate, triggering the lucid dreams electrically, and how that's measured. The last few films in our YouTube channel, 2 million views. So this is, and he calls it the alchemy of the aura. That's very useful, actually, because it is non-destructive compression, implosion of charge specifically that does that. Alchem, meaning access to the black hole. It's a useful metaphor. And he talks about the oil that dissolves, the perfect solubility. Well, see, perfect solubility is when you melt, and when you melt into that center, it is the oil that dissolves. And that's related to the electrical function of the monoatomic gold, the origin of Holy Communion, the Ormes, and all that story is about melting the charge to center, where that conversion's non-destructive implosive compression, defining not just the LENR, low-energy nuclear reaction of cold fusion reactions, but describing exactly the cold fusion reaction at the center of the aura at the moment of bliss, when your lucid dream becomes measurably a stargate, and defining the sequence of symmetry operations known and proven to be the correlate of the visions you will see at the moment of death. goldenmean.info/immortality. Those famous Heinrich Kluge form constants, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. What everyone sees at the moment of death as they're seeing their entire life review, because if you don't do that compression well, you don't become distributable as a waveform. So we know also why things like implosive plasma, Therify.net, is famous for releasing dead ghosts. Also explaining very nicely why the ancestors will be released in the time of the rapture. Also explaining why the guns will melt in the time of the rapture. During that collective planetary implosion, sometimes called the next density, sometimes called the next dimension. The more correct electrical term would be when the number of harmonics superposed in the axis of spin rotation, the only definition of the next dimension, that harmonic inclusiveness, which is only possible in the presence of golden ratio, creates enough centripetal force, quote unquote, the next density. And the reason the density means anything is because during that implosion, you get that propagation into the longitudinal array, the rainbow light body. So you see how these languages begin to fit together. If we understand the electrical nature of these things, we're not going to need religion wars. And we're not even going to need a battle between the return of the Borg and spiritual governments. Because once we know what spirituality is electrically, clearly and responsibly, it's not just that religion wars are obsolete. It is that the possibility of agreement then exists between governments and universities. If we once knew what enables humans to have a soul, to lucid dream, and therefore take memory through death, and we're clear about that electrically, we know, for example, how human's aura becomes centripetal enough to lucid dream and take memory through death. If that's all very clear electrically, then no one can argue when they say, well, that vaccination is going to weaken your aura is measurable. So in effect, the technology of aura measurement, which is one very useful way to predict whether the aura is fractal or centripetal, and we honor Dr. Korotkov, GDV here, and our website on that is auraseer.com, A-U-R-A-seer.com. So measuring fractality in the aura is one way to measure the onset of that implosion there. And we have done before and after trials on that, using that tool also with Therify.net. So you see how many ways there are to measure electrically whether that technology, that vaccine or that robot pill that you ate or that injection, all of these things, whether or not they make you ensouled or make you a Borg, is now measurable. Oh, that means we could produce agreement about what's useful and what ain't useful. It's sort of like having the conversation with your teenager about recreational drugs. It ain't enough to tell them, well, you're going to get holes in your aura. No, you hand them the device, GDV, and show them the holes in their aura. That's the moment of truth. So that centripetal coherent generation is going to enable us to make intelligent decisions. Now, the historical context here is then useful, which gets us to the other part of our evening conversation. The Galactic Federation's councils, the history of galactic federations in this sector of the galaxy. And I think Michael Sala's work and his work confirming my wonderful friend Elena Denan and my other wonderful friend Alex Collier, and showing that these stories of the history of the galaxy fit together beautifully, I think Michael Sala's doing great work. And in that regard, I would like to point out what I suggest is the central story to that, Maury. The central story to that, Maury, is across the galaxy, AI is the scourge. It's the return of the Borg. It's the drones. It's Empire Strikes Back time. So the recurrent theme of what are the Galactic Federations fighting against, in short, what they're fighting against is two things: AI, transhumanism, and hive mind, Borg intelligence. Remember, the Greys, the Khmers from Orion Sector, what Langdon Denan usefully calls the Nebu, they are a hive mind. It's a white queen. And in my view, the opposite electrically of ensouled. And if you look at the Draco culture, they also have a white queen. I won't say it's the opposite of ensouled, but it's directly central on that problem, because it's well known that Draco's major problem was loss of long-term memory. In other words, oops, they forgot how to die well. Oh, they didn't have to die well. Details. If you don't know how to die well, you don't really get leverage on the array. That's why Luke Skywalker had a chance against when Empire Strikes Back, because Luke Skywalker could raise the Jed, Jedi School.Science. And the raising of the Jed is the fact that his aura became plasma projective. When and if he went back to nature, the microchloridians in the blood, which later was called boson 7 at Montauk, is a name for the fact when the aura becomes implosive, coherent enough to emit that coherent longitudinal array called boson 7 at Montauk, called microchloridians in the blood in Star Wars. It was about DNA that was implosive and therefore ensouled. So this is the recurrent theme of not just Empire Strikes Back and our Star Wars future, as Michael Sala usefully calls it, but the core problem of this whole conflict across the galaxy is between, very specifically, two essential factions: the Borg hive mind AI versus the ensouled ones, the humanoids, the lucid dreamers. It's not just about humanoids. It's about those who know what a soul is. So I'm suggesting to you that the turning point, not just in the human Earth drama about are we all going to become the Borgs and transhumanism. That's just the local picture. The big picture here is that's also the centerpiece of the whole galactic drama, in the sense of, is the reason they're here because we are the potential vaccine for the Orion Wars? What is the vaccine for the Orion Wars? The vaccine is the seed of those who can make a soul in their children. That's what the seed is. And that's what I believe Elena Denan calls the seeders. And remember, this is the theme. Now, I made this wonderful film with Elena Denan about who are the nine and the cedar races. And that film went viral, and that's wonderful. And, a short thematic review. When my friend Andrea Puharich taught Phyllis Schlemmer to communicate with the nine, and they identified themselves after Andrea said first, they called themselves Atun, and then Atum, then Tam, and then Enki, and then finally Thoth, Tahuti. And then, in The Only Planet of Choice, the biggest book about this, Phyllis Schlemmer, which is beautifully reviewed in this book. The review is there about that with Michael Salla. It was very, very clear, quite simply. The returning cedar races in the giant planetoid-sized starship that just returned with a fleet of hundreds of ships in Ganymede and the moons of Jupiter, hosted by the Ashtar Command. All the details, the history, the documentation, the reviews, and who has confirmed this. Right here, Michael Salla did a great job. So when they arrive back, the Intergalactic Federation arrives back, the Cedars, who were that? Oh, he says, I am Thoth, Hermes. That's who I am, Tahuti. Well, who's Thoth? Well, Thoth is the name of the royal ancestries of every Egyptian pharaoh, Thothmosis. Thoth is a name for the father of the Magdalene bloodline, if you believe any Templar. Thoth is the name for Thule, Atlantis. Thoth Hermes is the name for Quetzalcoatl and Veracocha. Thoth really gets around. And by the way, what was his primary agenda? Running around interviewing every indigenous tribe on the planet under the name Veracocha, Quetzalcoatl, to study their lucid dreaming. Oh, maybe he was interested in how to make a soul. Ooh, what's the story to the Mori of the reason the cedar races are back here? What are they here to seed? Thoth, Hermes, Enki. What is the agenda? Caduceus, today called phase conjugation. What is the agenda, hermetically sealed, as it were? The agenda is quite simple: to learn how that implosive compression, sometimes called bliss, which is simply a name for the implosion of charge that produces radiance of charge, bliss, very measurable, very essential to not just have an immune system, but to take memory through death, to get a soul, literally. So the message is actually pretty simple. It's, can we teach our kids how to make a soul? Do your children lucid dream? Indigenous tribes lived on the same magnetic line for 100 generations, and that magnetic line was alive with their memory. So the storm across the whole continent of Australia when Auntie Lorraine died of the Bundjalung tribe was the family magnetic line that behaved like the sacred corn DNA of the Hopi that would only germinate if you sang their song to it. That DNA was a family pet. Well, the same is true of that magnetic line right across the continent. That magnetic line, that literally serpent track, dream trap song line, that was the family pet. And when the family ancestor died, the storm that went down that song line cut a trail of destruction right across the whole continent. That's the story of Auntie Lorraine. And it's just the beginning of the story to the Mori, which is these magnetic lines, these dreaming tracks, which is a plasma serpent, and the intelligent relationship between that and DNA that's walked the same soil for 100 generations and became fractal to that soil, embed ability, as it were. So this is what Enki, Hermes, Thoth, Quetzalcoatl, Veracocha was studying, because This is the turning point in the Star Wars history. The difference between the Borg is those who know what it is to make a soul. It couldn't be simpler. And that answer has to be electrical. It has to be rigorous and detailed and good physics. And now we have exactly what that is, and that needs to be taught. Otherwise, our children are going to be sucked into being the Borg too. They will live in metal buildings with electrosmog surrounding them to such a sense that they'll have no chance of becoming lucid dreamers and taking memory through death. And so Enki's Cedar Race Hermes mission will be lost. So somebody needs to be here teaching the deep science of these things. Actually, there's a few more things I wanted to tease out of this conversation. Elena Denan is one of my favorite persons on the planet, and I'm delighted that she has invited me to make those films with her, which also went viral, like 50, 70,000 views. It was fun. We'd made one on the physics of propulsion of the UFOs, impulse versus warp power. We made one on the physics, the plasma physics of the Nine and the Cedar Races, and we made one on the physics of galactic history. But so just a little commentary there that in the two of Elena's recent films, one was about, let's see, the rainbow body. I wanted to talk about her conversation with Dan Willis. You know, Dan Willis spent half a lifetime with Marcel Vogel. But I swear I knew Marcel Vogel a lot better than he did. And he's talking about, see, when I was with Marcel Vogel in Toronto, at the Physics of Consciousness Symposium with Bill Tiller and all the guys, Marcel Vogel was sitting there sweating up a storm using this crystal to pump, and he had a polygraph, which I designed the polygraph that did this kind of thing. And the polygraph was measuring the plant leaf, and he was proving he could talk to that plant. And that was a beautiful thing. And, see, there's some limitations to that understanding, and that's why I'm suggesting Dan Willis needs a little more electrical engineering here. For example, I had a detailed conversation. I lived with Marcel Vogel, remember, too, both in Toronto and when I hosted him for the psychotronics conferences out in Denver at the Mining Institute. And Marcel had, he, like everybody, he had astral hygiene. He had hygiene problems. He was badly overweight, and he was it's a long story in his later life, and no criticism here. But technically, I had a detailed conversation with that man, and he did not know how to align the facet plane with the molecular plane on the quartz crystal. And that's a problem. You have to use the birefringent z-axis, the only axis which will rotate the plane of polarized light, and that will allow you to accurately map the molecular plane onto the facet plane. Well, that's okay. Marcel was a sweet guy, but the physics then is that piezo quartz crystal z-axis, and you have to be able to identify where is the z helical axis, because it's that spiral helix slinky z-axis of quartz, not just that rotates the plane of polarized light, because it's a helical slinky, which is how the SiO2 tetracubic silicon dioxide bond array ratchets a cube up a helix, so it's literally a hex helix, the six-sided. But that helicity is the only reason it's piezoelectric, like DNA, but that's Penta. And it's a profound difference in terms of ensoulment. And you can't make a hex helix have a soul. If DNA was hex, we wouldn't have a soul. Well, the quartz crystal has a similar problem, actually. But to understand the depth of that is then, if you're holding that quartz crystal, and he usefully talks about the Vogel crystal, the physics of when that quartz crystal does something useful to biology is when there's what's called a phase conjugate pump wave, trigger wave, which embeds in that crystal, for example, the RF phase conjugate pump wave that made the quartz crystal Koski Frost make 800 times its own weight in gravity, fractalfield.com/propulsion. So it's a phase conjugate pump wave which enables that helical piezo quartz crystal to spit out the longitudinal interferometry, which is the only way you can affect a plant or gravity. And you know what that phase conjugate pump wave was? The low frequencies of the human aura. So when you get the same infrasound that's making brainwave bliss and the low frequencies of the sacrocranial pump, that micro field of the human aura, when it's phase conjugate, the same way you make bliss, and when that is the pump wave of the guy holding that crystal and pointing it, then you get the longitudinal wave spinning out, and that's when you create gravity and affect plants and do all the magic stuff. Well, that physics was just completely beyond Marcel Vogel, really. And unfortunately, not knowing that physics, why a hex crystal will never have a soul, for example, it's a very serious astral hygiene problem. It's also, Tom Kenyon is a sweet guy, but ringing all these quartz crystals around and putting people into this hex state of bliss has all kinds of astral hygiene challenges, and we need to understand the difference between hex and pent in that regard. And so there's a whole level of astral hygiene science that will enable us to discriminate. For example, in the Flower of Life people, when they teach you to visualize this tetracube hex, you actually will attract parasites if you don't do the climax form, which is when the tetracube hex shadow tilts 32 degrees, the chin angle of Sphinx, embedding the tetracube into the pentodeca, and the hex becomes pent. That is the implosion moment, and that's when you spit out the parasites. Until then, you're attracting parasites. Oops! Little astral hygiene problem 101 here, Flower of Life. goldenmean.info/Merkaba, Merkabbah, the story and the pictures. So once you know the physics, you can teach the astral hygiene. That's what I'm saying. And we need to look deeply at the science if we're not going to get stuck in woo-woo land. But there was one more thing I wanted to say about Elena Denan here, that her work with Michael Salla has been great. There was one more thing here. New kind of human. We talked about Moyang. We talked about William Henry. Oh, yes. Yeah, here, the other thing. I love it when Elena Denan is talking about, she just spent 2 hours with Enki. When Elena told me personally that she just met Enki, my jaw dropped. I thought it was fabulous because I've been studying Enki. I wrote a book on Enki, goldenmean.info/Enki, and my lady friend was frankly a little bit skeptical. So when Elena Denan says, I met the guy, I thought that was, she said, he had big wings and he was powerful. And he came back, and he's leading the Super Galactic Federation and the returning Cedar races. I thought that was fabulous. And all the people who were skeptical of my Enki book might now take another look. And all the work of Anton Parks, I think these things fit together. I think it's a scream. I love the developing melodrama here. Anywho, there's just one, I enjoy pulling chains here. But there was a funny moment when Elena, I think Elena is really a sweetie, and she was having her conversation with Donnie Henderson in the film with Donnie, D-A-N-E-D-I-N-I. And she said, well, one of the strange things when I was in the presence of Enki for 2 hours is I smelled negative ions. and Donnie's saying, well, if Enki's so powerful, why would he need to make negative ions around his aura? And really, these people, you need to understand a little bit of science, but implosive plasma, Therify.net, is just a big negative ion. That's all it is. A negative ion is a little black hole for charge. And when a negative ion, little black hole for charge, gets to be a big black hole for charge, you call that God. And so why would there be negative ions in Enki's aura? That is proof of the pudding, man. That is gorgeous correlation of the physics here. That the very capacitive charge implosion, which was making his aura centripetal, a key byproduct is the survival of negative ions. Just like the negative ions that are medically proven to cause healing in hospitals. This is classic medical literature. And negative ion wind that's profoundly healing, you make a big negative ion wind, that's called Therify.net, making plasma healing or at least rejuvenation in 25 countries. So here is beautiful Elena Denan saying, I experienced Enki, and the proof of the pudding is I experienced a negative ion wind from his aura, and Donnie's scratching her head. There is a certain threshold where New Age woo-woos are going to need some physics or they're going to remain clueless. And I'm not teasing or picking on anybody, but I'm just saying that people like Elena Denan deserve to be surrounded by people who know some serious science so that there can be very intelligent and very shareable conversations. Elena Denan is valuable because she has been brave enough to be the communicator, and she has been attacked, and she needs to have the right friends. And I'm happy to say that Michael Salla and Alex Collier are good friends, Elena, and I'm glad of that. And I'm not teasing anyone. I like the people that Elena is talking to. All I'm saying is, let's make the science serious enough so this conversation becomes absolutely shareable with every university and government on the planet, as well it should be. And by the way, I would like to say right now that anybody that's talking about the political history of, for example, the United States, that's ignoring the role of the United States in the Galactic Federation, they're just stupid. I mean, anybody who's ignoring the presence of the extraterrestrials in Earth politics right now is frankly just a dummy with their head in the sand, and needs to get their head out of the sand and realize the situation. The situation is that Eisenhower tried hard but screwed up because MJ-12 sucked him into the wrong treaty with the great Draco Gray Nebu, and millions of humans were abducted and abused and tortured by the Greys and the Dracos, and they're trying to sneak back in right now. And Marina Sarin has talked about this problem, and Elena Denan, they're all right, that they're correct, that if we let the Greys back in here now, we're going to lose our soul. And in order to kick the Greys and the Dracos out of here, we're going to have to understand the physics of what a soul is versus a Borg hive mind. And that's why I'm here to join Elena Denan and others to say that we need to propagate an accurate physics which talks about the difference between those humans who are ensouled and those who are the Borg. And so what happened then is the Galactic Federation had to come back in here with a massive fleet. This is a short summary. This is a short 2-cent summary of an excellent book now. So the Galactic Federation, about 1 to 3 years ago, had to come in here with a big fleet and kick the asses of the Gray Nebu Dracos out of not just the underground Earth, but the underground Moon and Mars and Ceres, the planet. They kicked them out of here, the Greys and Dracos. But guess what? Here's the practical reality of the present situation. The Galactic Federation are our friends, and they did a good job kicking the Greys and the Dracos out of here. Wonderful. And they're dealing with them across the galaxy, and that is messy. And the fact is the Galactic Federation is beautiful. Thousands of intelligent cultures on thousands of planets. I mean, this is big. You know, let's get our ego out of the sand here and realize who we are. We're a little piece in a big picture. And that picture is simple. The Galactic Federation kicked the Greys and the Dracos out of here, those who were preventing humans from having a soul. But, and here's a big but, the Galactic Federation is fundamentally weaker, and I do mean weaker, militarily not as strong as the Greys, Nebu, Draco, and the other negative cultures from Orion. There's some beautiful cultures in Orion, but there's a lot of really bad guys in the Orion culture. Read Elena Denan's book, Gift from the Stars. The details are there. Point being, those Greys, Nebu and Draco, they will be back. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, I'll be back. Well, guess what? The Federation is running around like chickens with their head cut off, telling they're so desperate, they even got Elon Musk signed up. That's how desperate they were. I'm not picking on the poor guy. I think he, whatever. Let's not have that conversation. But the point is, they said, we're not going to apologize. We were desperate for any technologies and culture on this planet that could begin to form the fleet that's going to be necessary for when the Greys and Dracos come back. Hello, they will be back. Read my lips. And we damn well need to be ready. And that's what half this book is about. The fact that the Earth Federation, it's called the Earth Alliance, and they now have elected the USA. You know, there could be pluses and minuses of that, but let's not go there. The fact is, they're desperately seeking anyone who can help the solar system prepare the fleet necessary for when the Dracos and Greys come back. That's the deal. We need to get our show together And to get our show together, we need to learn the physics. We need to learn the propulsion systems. We need to have a defense array. You know what a defense array is for the Earth? One aspect of a defense array for our planet would be a team of lucid dreamers who are able to kick out interstellar plasma parasites. That would be an example of an immune system for a planet. Here, a team of lucid dreamers who could kick out big plasma parasites. That is urgently required. Yes, we got to get our show together. We don't have much time. So anyway, I carry on. That was me, Dan Winter, told my story. This will all be at my ET story summary site, fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. I'm not sure if that was a happily ever after, but I always turn off Lassie episodes if they're not happy. So the happily ever after is we could learn how to teach our children enough bliss to have a soul, and we could become the vaccine for the Orion Wars. But we damn well need to get our show together pretty quick, or we're going to be toast. Dan Winter, signing off.